so how often is it that economics students, when they start the course in Cambridge, have this kind of approach towards economics, thinking of economics as more of a subjective study that they should be critical and discerning about, rather than an objective science like maths or physics?
So I've been doing this job of directing studies for the last quarter of a century at Trinity Hall. And this is an interesting question, and this is, there's various kinds of students, applicants that apply to read economics in Cambridge. Broadly speaking, there's two types.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that one.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Cristiano Ristuccia. I direct studies at Trinity Hall in economics, and I'm an economic historian mostly.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be talking about studying economics at Cambridge. We're going to go into the course, talking about what makes a good economist. So yeah, stay tuned if you're interested in studying economics. Cristiano, what kind of student would you say would enjoy studying economics at Cambridge?
Okay, so we'll come back to this later, but of course, you need to be numerically capable. As in, you need to have a good grounding in mathematics. Otherwise, it simply becomes difficult. But that's a necessary condition rather than a sufficient condition to enjoy the course. If you really want to enjoy the course, you need to have an interest for current affairs, for how people interact, for psychology, and this needs to be an intellectual interest. If you don't have that, it's going to be difficult because at times it's very dry stuff. And so if you don't see an intellectual interest in it, then it becomes a chore more than and it's very intense.
Interesting. So if a student is choosing between studying, let's say, HSPS, which is Human, Social, Political Sciences, and economics, or history and economics, what distinguishes economics between those kind of disciplines?
I suspect the mathematical side is stronger in economics, and probably economics is more focused on how people interact through markets than other subjects. And as for history and economics, there are various ways to take that, and you can have very little in the way of quantitative skills, and do it perfectly well. So it's up to you. And again, probably we should talk about this further, as the interview goes on.
Nice.
And I'm hoping to give you a sense of
Of course. So for anyone who doesn't know, could you give a brief overview of what their economics core structure is like, and what kind of modules, core modules and optional modules students will be able to study if they're doing economics?
So currently, and for many decades, the basic structure, the core of the tripos in economics has remained the same. So in the first year, you do 5 compulsory papers, and they are microeconomics, macroeconomics, a quantitative methods in economics course, which covers maths and stats. And then you do a course on the politics of Britain from 1945 to to now, more or less, and then you do a course on the economic history of Britain from 1750 to 1939. And I'm saying kind of currently because things might move kind of, in the next kind of few years, kind of, and these are compulsory courses. The kind of structure, the courses have changed a bit in the first year, particularly for the paper in economic history and the paper in politics. They become a little bit less Britain focused than they've been kind of historically, kind of, and more kind of, putting the kind of experience of Britain in this period, in fact, into an international context. Because fundamentally we are an international kind of university, and the kind of, type of applicants that we get applicants from all over the world. So in a sense, we kind of, thinking that kind of, just focusing kind of strictly speaking on Britain kind of might be not particularly useful, and not particularly attractive kind of to students that come from different backgrounds and different areas, but also because there's an intellectual kind of reason to do that. It's difficult to understand the history of this country in isolation. It's always kind of much more kind of rewarding from an intellectual point of view and from in terms of understanding to put it in an international context.
Nice. That's really interesting. It's really interesting how the course has broadened to looking into global economics rather than just British history. For anyone who's interested, could you share with us how economists are taught in the Cambridge course? Is it primarily lectures or?
Okay, before we go there, I realized that kind of for some reason I just talked to you about the first year, but actually the question was about the structure of the entire course. So let's kind of cover that before we go kind of further. So second year, it's becomes a little bit more about choices. So there's 3 papers that are still kind of compulsory out of 4. And the 3 papers that are compulsory obviously are Macroeconomics, and econometrics, which is kind of the application of statistical method to the study of economics. Okay. And then there's kind of a 4th paper that is your choice. And the choice starts to become kind of, interesting. You can go for things that are very theoretical, kind of to things that are very mathematical, and 2 things that are very kind of, more qualitative, kind of, there's a number of kind of choices. And then in the 3rd year, the choices increase further. As in the 3rd year, kind of, you got 2 compulsory papers, and those papers are, guess, microeconomics and macroeconomics. And but then kind of, there's a compulsory dissertation that the student kind of writes, and this is kind of a first introduction to doing research, and we can come back to kind of the reason why we do that and what's good about it. And that kind of allows you to concentrate on an aspect of kind of economic research that you particularly get drawn to, is of interest to you, and kind of, you might think that you will be like to kind of write something kind of about it, which might or might not be original, but kind of, that's the idea. And then there's kind of 2 choices of papers which are not compulsory, and there kind of, the range is very wide, kind of, from development economics to borrowing papers from other kind of faculties, kind of to lots of different things, to more mathematics, to more kind of theory, to more kind of hardcore game theory, and whatever kind of you want.
Nice. That sounds really, really cool. Didn't realize how broad the course was. For anyone who doesn't know, could you explain briefly what microeconomics and macroeconomics are?
Okay, so micro and macro, obviously, kind of Greek terms for small and big.
Yeah.
Microeconomics typical deals with kind of, how agent kind of work, kind of, and so the agents can be consumers, can be producers, can be kind of, and is the idea that you can look at the behavior of a number of what we call agents, kind of, as in those that participate in markets, kind of, and now what drives their choices, what kind of how to model that, and this is what kind of microeconomics does. Macroeconomics is kind of more about kind of, how the economy works rather than how each kind of, and of course the two are linked because the economy works as a response to what kind of each agent kind of does. But kind of, to make it very simple for anybody who will be kind of listening, kind of, and might not know a thing about economics, fundamentally macroeconomics is about how to govern the economy. As in kind of what kind of governments kind of do and how do that action kind of interacts with how the market kind of works, and how can kind of, governments can kind of reach certain objectives in terms of kind of growth, in terms of equality, in terms of kind of distribution of resources, in terms of kind of productivity, and so on and so forth. So it's more about the economy as a whole, and indeed the economy in relation to other economies, but particularly in relation to kind of governing the economy, if you want. Yeah. So here kind of we get into kind of, more towards kind of, the idea that somehow there's a role for kind of politics in all this, and of views and ideology and all that, and kind of, that we shape kind of, and what kind of macroeconomics tries to do is to kind of see what kind of, governments or monetary authorities kind of should do in responses to crisis, for example. Kind of, there's a major banking crisis. What would kind of, what should kind of the Bank of England do? That sort of question kind of would be kind of classic kind of question, which would be answered by microeconomics.
Nice. Yeah, I can see how students studying macroeconomics could then lead to like different careers into like these governing bodies, which sounds really exciting. So you mentioned that part of the course there's a dissertation, and so besides that, what other forms of teaching are there in the economics course? Like, are there lectures or classes?
So yeah, kind of we students are kind of going through put through a very kind of tough schedule kind of in Cambridge, to be entirely honest. So typically, although not always, kind of, lessons are in the mornings, kind of, people go to lessons, kind of, you're expected, if you are kind of a student in Cambridge, to go to all of the lessons in the faculty. And that means a little walk into the Situate side, which is not that far from here, where you'll be joined by the rest of the 170, 180 first-year economists or second-year economists or third-year economists, and you'll be listening to the courses that you kind of chosen. And then there's a lot of kind of, supervision work. Well, in Cambridge we call supervision, in Oxford it's called tutorials. Kind of these typically are you are kind of seeing an expert in the field, and you've been set some work to do, either writing an essay or solving some kind of equations, or kind of answering kind of some problems in macro kind of, and then you submit this in advance to your supervisor, and then you have a conversation, typically in a group of 2 or group of 3 or a group of 4, with the kind of supervisor about what you've done, and how things could have been done differently. And this is intended to help you with kind of, acquiring kind of the knowledge, but also it's fundamentally about helping you kind of engaging into a thinking conversation kind of with others, and And this is very useful, it's very important, and it's crucial in the model of teaching at Cambridge, and it's no different from other faculties in that sense.
Yeah. Nice, interesting. So, was that economics? The course at Cambridge sounds quite, on one hand, maths heavy, but also there's a lot of more papers that are more history, politics related. In these supervisions, are students writing essays beforehand to submit, or are they filling out problem sets beforehand?
Depends on the subject, of course. So I teach mostly economic history, so typically students are required to write an essay, submit an essay on a particular question, having read a substantial amount of stuff. And the idea here is that and then we will discuss it in the supervision. The idea, I think, let me explain. A lot of students that come to Cambridge to study economics are taken aback by this, having to do essay-based because they assume they would be entirely problem solving and mathematical exercises. I'm very evangelical about the fact that we're doing this, and there's a good reason to do that. In fact, there's a series of good reasons to do that. First of all, it's a skill that the market likes. Being able to digest a lot of information very quickly, and produce an executive summary, if you want. So what is a typical skill that the market enjoys, and pays good money for. So it's good to have it. One might say, but in the day of artificial intelligence, maybe it's a redundant skill, but I would be surprised if it does become redundant, and so there's that purely utilitarian reason to learn to do this,
to write well,
and to be able to just in a very short amount of time to digest a very large amount of written material, and then being able to summarize not only the material but also to say who was right and who was wrong, according to you. Which is an important skill, and in that I suspect artificial intelligence doesn't do it very well, because it tends to do just the survey of the material, but then doesn't give that further step, which is what is valuable, which is to say, and I think I've read all of this thing, that this is the right position to take, and this is the wrong position to take, and I'm telling you why.
Nice.
The other thing is that, and this is will come I'm sure become clearer in the interview today in this talk, is that actually economics is not necessarily an objective science. So there's various points of view, and we think that is important to develop a critical mind. Otherwise, you are at the mercy of whatever you read or whatever get in contact with, and you're not responding really to what the information that comes to you, and it all sounds perfectly reasonable, and then but why is it? And the fact is that there are different opinions, and you ought to have to be presented with all of the as a way to force you to think about what you think, and that is crucial in economics, because in many ways that's what differentiates social sciences from pure sciences.
That's interesting, because a lot of prospective students will be choosing between studying maths or studying economics, and do you think, in what ways would you say these courses are different to each other, and are they as similar to each other that prospective students think they are?
I think they are very different. Fundamentally, they're very different, and So first of all, to do maths, you need to be a good mathematician. To do economics, you need to be a good mathematician, but also be something else. For example, as we say, you need to be able to write essay, to distill a lot of non-quantitative information. To have a critical mind. It's a more it's a way broader set of skills that you need to have. But there is also a fundamental difference in terms of attitudes. Presumably, if you're a mathematician, you like to solve puzzles. You are got a very theoretical mind. Yeah, the objects of the puzzle that you're solving with purely logical skills, which is mathematics, it's not as important to you as it would be for an economist. For an economist, if you're not interested in what you're trying to model, if you're trying what kind of problem you can try to resolve using mathematical skills, then probably you're not going to be a good economist. Yeah, you would be better off doing mathematics. Here, is very much about applying those skills, applying those models, applying those mathematical tools to solve specific problems that relate to how we live. Yeah, how human beings interact with each other and all of that, and to mathematics, it's for more theoretically minded people, which is not to say that there's no theory. There's plenty of theory in economics, but the more one is just interested in theory, the more one is a limited economist.
Yeah,
fundamentally.
So, am I right in thinking is one of the biggest difference between economics and something like maths or a science or like a natural science is that I guess economics to some degree is about people, and there isn't a mathematical way to describe people's behavior, so can't entirely be, economics can never entirely be theoretical. Is that the right the right strand of thinking?
So okay, so this is difficult because fundamentally you're asking me whether economics is a science in this, and there's lots of problem. Of course, what is a science is a problem in itself, but if you want probably to understand the bigger difference between social sciences and physical sciences, then probably a number of things. First of all, yes, you're right. We're dealing with how people interact. These are very complex systems, and to some extent, even the observation and the understanding how they interact immediately changes how they interact. So there's an impossibility problem here. Suppose that you knew how you understood a market, because you studied it for a long time, and then you have, if you understood it properly, then you have the possibility to make a lot of money by exploiting what you know about that market that other people don't know. Yeah. But by doing that, you're immediately changing that market. Yeah. And so, in a sense, here, there's a fundamental problem of the observation to some extent being often in a position to affect what is being observed. Not entirely different from what we know about subatomic physical sciences, but that is a first point. The second point is opinion. So economics is born out of philosophy and historically. And so, like philosophy, relies, is very much about opinion. It's not just about, starting from a shared kind of point of view and then using kind of mathematical skills, logical skills, coming to the conclusions of how kind of things work. Yeah. The difference is that you don't start from a shared point of kind of views. The way where we start is necessarily far more determined by what we think politically, ideologically, about how people interact and what's good and what's bad and what's efficient and what is not efficient and and so on and so forth. Then having chosen our point of departure, then we apply mathematical skills, logical tools to get to, if this is true, then the outcomes must be that. In physical sciences, I would say the body of assumptions that are generally shared. And of course, those assumptions do change over time as people discover more things and makes new theories, and those theories are proved to be right. But these are cumulative things and are more shared in a sense. Yeah. And in that, there's fundamentally a difficulty for social sciences to ever get there. People might think that they get into being more objective, but to some extent, economics, not differently from other social sciences, remains largely subjective, both in assumption and therefore in the conclusions. Yeah, and if you there's no way that mathematics in itself will get out of you, get you out of that. Yeah, because mathematics is fundamentally a language. It's fundamentally a set of tools to get from A to B. But if people disagree on what A is, then probably you don't get to the same point of end point using the same tools. Yeah, and then there's obviously issues of what we're trying to do modeling, we're trying to simplify complex interactions, and any choice of how much we simplify would somehow not only affect the results and affect the ability of us to model that complexity, but also is in itself a political choice. Yeah. I can assume that everybody behaves in the same way, because that clearly is a simplification, but the more I do that, the more I'm choosing a political view. Yeah, the more I think, oh no, agents behave differently one from the other. The more I'm taking another political view, and presumably what I would say then on the efficiency of the markets and on the outcomes of market interaction would be very different, depending on what choice I made. And I could be as mathematical as my colleague who has different views, and I would still get to different conclusions.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's say we have an example of an economist. They produce a model that's based on a set of data, and it's mathematically really rigorous, and they analyze the data using the maths correctly. Does that mean it's a good model, or is it not as simple as that?
It's not as simple as that, fundamentally. Okay, we have a common language, and our common language is mathematics. Yeah. And I'm saying this as an economic historian, but fundamentally, there is a common language, a way to express thoughts, which is the mathematical ability to to follow a logical path to go from, and we're trying to do that. But a good mathematical model, I could have good mathematics, but in choosing mathematics. Or what mathematical tools I'm choosing, I'm also changing the nature of the question that I'm posing. Because, for example, we tend to make assumptions, simplifying assumptions on behavior of agents. Yeah. They maximize, they do things and that. These are assumptions that we largely make as to make a problem mathematically tractable.
Okay.
But those assumptions are not necessarily good assumptions, because maybe agents don't behave in those ways, or not all agents cannot behave in those ways. And but the more one wants to be realistic and think about and living complexity in, the more the less mathematically tractable the problem might become. And so you got a problem. The model might be very good in the sense that you can solve the problem, but then it's not very good because it has made the problem so simplistic that it doesn't reflect what you really want to investigate. So there are trade-offs that one is always making, and also. There was a fairly recently in the pages of the Financial Times an article on teaching economics in Britain, but in fact in the world, by my esteemed colleague and friend Hajun Chan at in London, who was in Cambridge before, was very scathing about what economics has become, and says we fundamentally have started to think all alike, and we became a priesthood, or under assault, or a particular point of view, and this is bad, and we should do something about it. And I agree with him. The fundamental understanding for many decades of economics was that there were lots of different points of views. What was common is the attempt to solve, to discuss this using a particular technique, which is that of using mathematical models and modeling. But that didn't change the fact that there were different point of views. Now it's become more and more, and that's the perception in the public, what we call neoclassical economics, fundamentally a view that markets are perfect, or that imperfections are minor, can be solved, they are at the margin, and that everybody optimizes, works in the same under the same conditions, and reacts to problems in the same ways. And although this seems to be pretty often disproved, we become, for reasons that are partially to do with the very fact that we use mathematics. Mathematics lends us to make those assumptions, because otherwise it's more difficult to make mathematical to apply mathematical tools.
So you have a student or an economist. They're trying to answer a question. They create a model, and am I right? So in economics, you'd need to have a high to be able to use mathematics. But am I right in thinking to be a good economist, you need to also understand the implications of any assumptions that you make in your model, and when you read other people's work, to understand the implications of their assumptions.
Absolutely. These are very important points that you're making. Let me be clear. If this conversation is going to help anybody who might think about applying to study economics, and if it is about a question about the mathematical skills required, so let's be absolutely simple. It's not that you need to have further maths. Although further maths doesn't it's useful, of course, if you have it. But actually, we do not require it. But what ought to be at Trinity Hall, in fact, in the university, several most colleges do not require further maths. And the reason is very clear. You can be a very good mathematician even having done just maths. And that is what kind of you kind of need to be. You need to be kind of, comfortable with it. And so from that point of view, yes. You need to be comfortable with mathematics, using mathematics, but also understanding the mathematics. What kind of mathematics means and why one model rather than the other, why one tool rather than the other, and what other people are saying with the mathematics. You need to understand that. And let me add another thing. We also think that kind of statistics is very important within mathematics, because fundamentally there's two things here. There's the theory, as in economists kind of write models about how things work, how kind of people interact with each other through markets and all that. But then there's the kind of further question, which is, do these models work? Because the fact that you derive from certain assumptions a perfectly logical kind of model that kind of predicts certain things, it's the start. Then you want to see whether that kind of model applies to actual kind of things. So you need to understand, you need to apply your models to the reality, the data that you got. So ability to understand statistics is very important. And statistical methods therefore are very important. And let me say more, I think, and this is my view, that that's another I was trained as a mathematical economist, and then I moved to do economic history. And one thing that I think is important in economic history is understanding the data. Do not make the assumption that the data is good. The data is not necessarily good. So you need to understand what are the problems with the data if you want to understand whether the outcomes that you get from applying a certain model, mathematical models, to this data produces. And if you don't understand that, you might think, oh, I got a perfectly good model because it predicts exactly what I see. And then you might decide whether what you see is not really what is happening, because the observation has been done badly, the data has been collected badly, there's a lot of problems it used to be the case in this country that we use economists use the statistical office data for unemployment. And we all know, I'm not dissing the statistical office, that I might a lot, but we all know that the statistics of the labor market in this country are not very good, and unemployment numbers are not very reliable, and not very people these days rely on, because of the methodology applies to collect those data, the surveys and all that are problematic. Now we know better those problems. And so it's for a labor economist to, there's now the other problem of saying, okay, fine, but what is what is the situation now and what it was before? I don't know, because the data is not very good. I need to find different data, or I need to adjust the data that I got for the problems that I know exist in the collection of those data. And these are all things that economic history teaches you very well to do, because you always dealing with very incomplete, very badly collected data, not collected by sampling theory, but for example collected simply by history. What got burned and what didn't get burned, what was collected originally and what was not collected, what was kept and what was not kept. These are problems that are obvious to an economic historians, but often to economists, particularly the more theoretical economists, they might not be obvious.
So it sounds so on the one hand there's models and creating a model and understanding the assumptions and also making sure that the maths of the model itself is correct, but then also when you're saying like, is this good data? Is this bad data? That is it. It sounds like it's an economist's responsibility to understand how the data is formed rather than just being able to use it.
Yes, yes. You should, I think, in general, you should never entirely rely on the data that is available there without understanding why it was collected in that way and who collected it, were there biases in collecting it. And we're talking about collecting typically data on human activities. So again, why you got that data, what it was the statistical methodology used to collect that data. If you don't understand that, you might get the wrong conclusions about how good your models are once you apply them.
And am I right in thinking someone who's dedicated a lot of time into these kind of activities like the and economic history, evaluating how reliable a data set is, or looking into different assumptions models have made, when that economist starts to make their own models, does that kind of education mean that they are more likely to create more accurate, realistic models?
Okay, so that's, sometimes data limitations prevent you from simply, there are things that simply there's no data, or the data is so rubbish that there's no point, having a model that uses that particular data. So you might as well not write the model in the first place. But I think, at least in my mind, we work in a slightly different way. We work like we have a theory, as in we develop a model that starts from certain assumptions and then and then we apply it, as in we see whether that model fits, as in it fits the data, what we observe, and if it doesn't fit, and that's the history, the interest of historical data, in a sense, historical as in simply from the past. It might be very recent past, but we tend to use the data to validate or otherwise a model, which is what scientists do. You get you go out in physics, in astrophysics, a model on how celestial bodies move and react with each other, and and then you write the model because you start, and you to decide what are the predictions of that model, and then you see whether those predictions fit the data or observational data, and in that is not different but in a sense there's still a presumably a two-step passage. The first develop your mathematical model that solves and then you see whether it works in that, but with this model, and in a sense whether it works or it doesn't work is a way to say whether the model that you developed is good or bad. Unfortunately, you need to be aware of the fact that you might think that is very good, but you might be coming to those conclusions for the wrong reasons if the data is not particularly good in itself.
Nice. And how often is it that Cambridge students who come into the economics course and studying economics have this kind of outlook when approaching their course in economics?
Sorry, I didn't.
So how often is it that economics students, when they start the course in Cambridge, have this kind of approach towards economics, thinking of economics as more of a subjective study that they should be critical and discerning about, rather than an objective science like maths or physics?
So I've been doing this job of directing studies for the last quarter of a century at Trinity Hall. And this is an interesting question, and this is, I mean, there's various kinds of students applicants that apply to read economics in Cambridge. Broadly speaking, there's two types.
Okay.
Yeah, there's those that want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they think that by coming to Cambridge, they would acquire the tools to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's probably more than half of the applicants.
Okay.
The second group is made from those that want to change the world for the better. Yeah. They're highly motivated by moral reasons, and they think that by coming to Cambridge, they learn how to run an economy, or how to they would go into major international organizations that would have the power to change the life of many. Both perfectly reasonable approaches. I'm not choosing between those, and I like both types. That's not. I don't have any preference. Yeah. I would do. I think both in both cases there might be misunderstandings on what you really get in Cambridge and by studying economics. First of all, I think that most of the stuff we teach is not strictly relevant for a job. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's not like being a lawyer, where you get a body of material that you need to know, and you get taught that, and then if you don't know it, you're not going to be a good lawyer. Yeah, you can be a very good investment banker, without really applying very much or your knowledge from even finance courses, I suspect. But I just want to, and I suspect quite rightly employers do a lot of on the job teaching, there's a lot of learning by doing, in these organizations. But what you get is presumably is that they definitely like people that did well in Cambridge, and they prefer those. And I've never seen anybody who didn't get a very good job, having studied economics and having done well in economics at Cambridge, and in fact you get good jobs very early on, even before you finish. But the reason why you get good jobs is not really because you learned a lot of economics models and how they work. They you learn the frame of mind, probably, to think in those terms. And probably that is what the labor market might be looking for. Maybe for those that want to change the world, what you learn in Cambridge might be more relevant to what you will eventually do. I'm not saying that is irrelevant. I'm just saying that it's less relevant than applicants might think. And in a sense, the only utilitarian point of approach to this, if you really apply them because you want to have an earning potential in your life by being a investment banker, or which is way above that of many, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. But you should be thinking about not as the tools that you learning here, but you earning, you're learning frame of mind. You learn to being very very concentrated, work very hard, and to produce quite a lot in very time constraint periods. These are the things that you're learning, and the market likes and values, and for which they pay the good money. To be entirely honest, rather than knowing a particular model or another, I suspect.
So for those who have a more philanthropic outlook, wanting to make a difference, change the world, improve things. Would I be right in assuming that the teaching style for the course, the supervisions, the encouragement for students to think for themselves, will someone doing the economics course in Cambridge develop skills to be able to think about the real world in a critical sense?
I think so. If you take it kind of in the right way, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a long tradition in economics of people that wanted to do exactly that, and that's kind of what you hopefully get immersed into, kind of while you're in Cambridge. I would say there is a fundamental kind of question, as in if we're talking about applicants, there is a fundamental question that you should ask yourself. Do you like to study these things? Yeah. And can you prove that you kind of like to study these things? As in, do you read kind of current news every day and you get excited by those? Do you know what are the kind of problems that affect the world today? And have you started thinking about how to kind of change them? How much you read before? It's not something that you come here and you get the interest. The interest has to be coming from you.
So another question I had about the course and the course title. Students, like when they're thinking about whether they want to study economics, they might be thinking, oh, I like the idea of studying economics, but I want to do actually a course like history and economics or PPE, so philosophy, politics and economics. But in that, I'm assuming, am I right in saying that the economics course in Cambridge does enable you to do papers that are revolving around history and politics?
Yeah, it does. It does. There's plenty of that if you kind of so minded. And I think it's a good thing whether if you are kind of so minded, to do them. And I would actually say that from this point of view, Cambridge has an historical advantage in comparison with many other kind of economics courses, at least in this country. So, for example, so immediately after the 2007-2008 crash, you might be too young to remember this, but there was a major financial crash, global financial crash, and in which one of the results was that a lot of people started to scratching their heads on why is it that economists as a kind of profession had been unable to predict the crash. Of course, that is not entirely true. There would be always somebody that predicts a crash because there's lots of different opinions. So there would have been economists that would have thought yes, this. But in general, there was a sense that economists are not done well in thinking, oh, there might be a major systemic crash which is global and affects the global financial sector, and through that the entire economy. Global economy. So we started scratching our heads and asking ourselves what was wrong with economics as a discipline, as a thought discipline. So much so that there was even the Bank of England ran a conference on this and produced a report with suggestions. And one of the suggestions was that undergraduate economic courses should have an economic history component. This I'm trying to think about how to put it. This so I had a colleague, a mathematical colleague, who was very keen on jokes. He always told me, Cristiano, the joke about economists. I said, no, I don't know that one. There's many of those No, I mean the one about driving on a mountain pass on a car coming down, kind of three persons, kind of, the mathematician, the engineer, and the economist on a mountain road coming down, all turns, kind of, steep kind of ravine underneath, kind of the car brakes kind of fail, and the car is accelerating, and there's all these turns, and they are kind of, oh my God, kind of, by skillful driving, they manage to stop kind of the car on a field on the side of the road, and they come off kind of all sweating, kind of, and the mathematician goes, takes out, kind of, calculates the forces that brought them kind of in that position. The engineer opens the bonnet to check what went wrong, and the economist says, should we do it again? And the idea is kind of fundamentally that kind of economists kind of seem to be, economics might have gone too much down the path of modeling irrespective of kind of history, as in kind of without looking whether the models kind of could kind of have been applied before. For example, it's very difficult to predict in economics a major kind of financial crash when it happens, and what brings us kind of to that, and kind of the tools that we use are not very good at doing that. And so there was an argument that came from that report from the Bank of England that we should kind of have a compulsory economic history part, so as to kind of so that people would know, oh, this has happened before. We might kind of learn something from the fact that kind of it has happened before. In fact, we tend to think about, for example, the obvious kind of precursor or kind of the 2007-8 kind of crash was the Great Depression in the interwar period. And the Great Depression is called in American economics the defining moment because it defines macroeconomic as a discipline. Macroeconomic emerges as a discipline, as a way to make sense of the major kind of cyclicality that we observe in the interwar and the Great Depression. So as a discipline, kind of, it's kind of comes from asking ourselves, kind of, why is it that these things happen? But then if we forget that we got a history, kind of, then we don't, kind of, we might kind of allow them to happen again, or not very good at kind of predicting when they kind of, might happen again. And that was kind of fundamentally the message. And to cut a long story short, or not really, but to go back to Cambridge, I think kind of we got an advantage. For historical reasons, we always had a kind of, economic history components in the teaching. And in that, I think kind of we are, and we remain at the forefront. So, for example, I think kind of this is so much better than how economics is taught in many US universities, which are our main competitors. Where kind of often kind of, economic history, it's interesting how important then economic history becomes. I mean, Ben Bernanke, that was kind of the chairman of the Federal Reserve during kind of the crisis, particularly immediately after the crisis, was fundamentally an economic historian. The current head of the Bank of England is an economic historian. So actually, kind of, these things kind of, are then kind of, economic historians kind of, or economists that have a knowledge of economic history find themselves in a strong position, both from the theoretical point of view and from a personal point of view of their careers. Kind of, in fact, I could say that kind of, there's a disproportionate number considering kind of, how small the field is in comparison to all the economists, but kind of economic historians have a tendency to be overrepresented in terms of in economics, almost, kind of,
in the Nobel Prizes.
Nobel Prizes in economics, they often go to people that probably could be, economist, but like of the economic historian sort, if you want. And that there's a reason for that. I can think about two, particularly one. Well, there's a lot of them. Ashemoglu. It's an economist who's got a very strong background in economic history. But going one of my favorite of the recent Nobel Prizes in economics, Claudia Goldin. Claudia Goldin got a Nobel Prize for studying inequality in terms of gender inequality when it comes to earnings, and why that happens and what could be done to reduce inequality in those terms. And it's fundamentally she's an historian of a labor historian, and she studied the American labor statistics, and then applied theory to that and got Nobel Prize in that. And this is massive. It's she's a massive role model for lots of people, and I think she's done something very important, because we all knew that there was inequality, but the mechanisms that bring to that inequality in terms of earning are it's useful to know how it works, and because only by knowing how it works, then you can address the issue of inequality on those counts. So there's plenty of economic historians that then went on to do great things in terms of economics.
So it sounds like there's a lot of role models who've succeeded massively in economics by subsequently winning the Nobel Prize. To finish off, to bring it back to the start of economists' careers, what would make a strong applicant? What would make a strong applicant to apply to economics studying at Cambridge, with regards to whether it's their A levels or how they approach, or just how they approach economics as well?
Okay, so we all got our biases, and I got certain biases, and I think I can answer for what I think, and I'm not going to say anything on behalf of anybody else on this one. I think a good applicant, in my experience, is first and foremost somebody who cares, really is interested, intellectually attracted by this sort of research work, problems, and we discuss that. If you do it because somebody else tells you that you should do it, or because there's familial pressure or whatever, then you got a problem fundamentally, and it's a serious problem, because then you'll be doing things that you feel are very dry and not very interesting, and and it's going to be difficult and tough actually. You need to be good at maths, because that's the language that we use. And if you're not, then, but how good at it? Well, as I said, good. A levels in maths is all that is necessary, but a facility with maths, it's and you can teach yourself that facility, by the way, and it's not that is an impossibility to do that. As a student in Italy, I was, before going into mathematics, I studied classics, mostly, and in a high school that kind of focused on classics. And then kind of, because that was kind of what in Italy, kind of they do a lot of that. And kind of, and my maths was kind of not very good, but I was very keen on developing kind of, maths. And so I went into, I kind of prepared before going into economics. And then during kind of while I was doing economics, I did anything that was, the more mathematical, the more I liked it.
Nice.
Kind of fundamentally, And so in a sense, you can teach yourself that. You can kind of, you shouldn't be kind of thing, oh no, I'm not very good at maths. Kind of, I don't think there's anybody that is very good at maths. It's kind of, how much they want to be good at maths that matters. Kind of, then you can do it. It's like learning a language fundamentally.
Difficult for everyone.
Difficult, kind of, but once you get into it, you can do it. And as I said, it's not enough to be a good mathematician. So to have a facility with numbers, you got to have an interest, and you got to probably I like, and I say kind of, we say it at Trinity Hall, kind of, we like people that have an essay-based subject when they apply. And the reason is that actually you got to write a lot. And a lot of kind of, particularly for people that want to make a lot of money in kind of the lifetime, this is a very important skill to have, because that's what the market likes about kind of people, kind of, people that can write, they get good jobs fundamentally. And because you often have to write stuff kind of, in jobs. And we test a lot for that. And so if you cannot write, and if you haven't kind of, a strong kind of facility with written English word, kind of, then it's a problem. And you should kind of, and not only you should kind of be able to write, but you should enjoy that process. Kind of, we test people on things that are called Cambridge essays, which are very different from those in school. But fundamentally, you got to make your case. So you are like a lawyer in court, and you're trying to say, oh, I got there's this theory out there and this other theory out there. I'm telling you that my theory is better because the evidence kind of confirms it. And you got to discuss all of the evidence and the evidence to the contrary and all that. This is a skill, kind of, is an exercise in persuasion, and it's a useful skill to have. It's a transferable skill, and it's anyway kind of whatever kind of we teach a lot of it. And we test a lot of that. So, if you're not kind of, if you think that you're very mathematical, but you haven't got that, then my advice would be, spend a lot of time reading as much as possible. Because the only way to learn to write is to read a lot. And read whatever you want, read novels, read but read. Because you need to read. And I know that these days nobody reads anymore, but my advice would be, this is something that you ought to do. Read whatever.
Nice, amazing. Oh, that's such an amazing podcast. Hope it was really useful for imagine it would be really useful for students who are thinking about studying economics and neighbouring subjects as well, and kind of showcasing. I think economics at Cambridge has a reputation for being mathematically heavy, but you've shown that it's much more than that, which I think is really, really cool. And thanks for the viewers for watching. We're hoping to do podcasts on the remaining courses that we haven't done yet. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you guys next time. Nice.
Thank you. That was lovely.
Nice.